Ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? This is your host, Sunny from the podcast. It's always sunny in the six. Happy Thursday. Hope you guys had a great long weekend. Of course, I'm sure for a lot of us, it's a short week. I got another episode for you guys. I'm in the studio today with a really good friend of mine, Gina Uppal. We've known each other for some time. Gina, she has a stacked resume. She's been working in a bunch of cool organizations. She's worked in Brazil for some time. She was also in Washington studying there. Currently, she's actually working at Western University. She's a partnerships lead in the lab for knowledge translation in health. Anyways, she's in here. We catch up. We talk about everything from public policy, COVID, ethics of data surveillance, entrepreneurship, future of healthcare and technology, ransomware, and we kind of just shoot the shit. We talk about our, what we've been up to personally during this lockdown, and a lot of interesting information is being discussed. Hope you guys enjoy it, and if you do, hit me up on Instagram, send me some feedback. Don't forget to subscribe on the podcast as well, so you guys are up to date in all future episodes. And you know what? Let's get the ball rolling. Let's go. All alone with me, and we're waiting for the sunlight, drink and not have to worry about my mom or dad showing up and being like, "Hey kids, what's up?"
I know. Can I come? Can I partake in the festivities? And you're like, "Oh my God, go away." Yeah. Well, on the front end of the pandemic, I was living at home. It lasted about 2 months before we realized that we were all gonna love each other long term more if we continued to be separated. Because I moved out of Markham, out of my parents' house when I was 18 and went to Western, and never really moved back in. Like even in the summers, I would like find something to do. I've always just sort of like wanted to be anywhere but Markham sometimes.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, especially when you're like young and like in my early 20s, I just wanted to travel. I wanted to like see the whole world, and I was like gunning up to like figuring out how to do that. But yeah, no, especially when you want to like become your own person, and you're like stretching your wings a little bit. I think both of us have reinvented ourselves quite a bit over the years.
Yeah. I mean, if you look back a little bit, I think it's been about 2 years, believe it or not. Or was it last year? No, it's been 2 years because we were in this pandemic for a year. We met up. We met up at the atrium of the Exchange Tower.
Oh my gosh, I remember that.
We grabbed a coffee. You just got back to Toronto from Brazil, I think.
Yeah.
And I was in my dress shirt, dress pants. People around us were bustling to and from work, grabbing their lunches, grabbing their coffee. And who would have thought, like, fuck, 2 years later, we would be in the situation that we're in. I know you were already kind of working remotely in the context of the work that you've been doing. And so we're going to talk about a little bit about that as well. But it's just incredible that, I mean, we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
I know, it's like such an amazing like feat of our public health system to like within a year of this this virus showing up, we've been able to like lock ourselves down, like create a vaccine, which in and of itself, like a year to do that process is like, we wouldn't have been able to do that without the technologies we have today. And it makes me reflect a lot about like how many people had to come together to make sure that we all got through this. Yeah. And it's like that collective that's just really beautiful. But it's like still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, a lot of work to do, but that's a good point because like it reminds me of like those movies that we see, like Contagion, for example. Mm-hmm. Like here we are, we're like your regular citizens that are sitting at home pointing fingers at each other, saying, screw the government, this and that. But I'm sure there's like a lot happening behind the scenes. There's people that are probably like there's probably that one person or that team of people that are like maybe that were at the forefront of this. There must have been a lot happening behind the scenes to get a vaccine that, traditionally, because of science, it might take a couple of years with trials and whatnot to now being like, we don't have the luxury to have a couple of years. We need this now. right? And so then at the same time, there must have been a bunch of volunteers that were like, okay, you can volunteer on me, right? Not knowing what the
Completely.
implications would be, right? So, because I think I'm not no scientist or doctor, but I'm sure there's like it's a huge process. Like you got to maybe test animals first, then people, but it's probably likely that they went straight to human trials as soon as they could. So
Yeah, I know that during certain emergencies, you can kind of get special permission to sort of skip some steps. And it's still a very highly regulated process. Like for things to go through Health Canada, it's like pretty legit, the things that get through. So I feel like safety wise, knowing because I studied public health and I have like a little bit of a background and I work in healthcare. So I never felt unsafe, but I was sort of very curious about the science and like how fast a lot of these, therapies were created. And even like some of the fringe things that were happening. Like, I don't know if you heard about people with COVID long haulers.
no,
So, like people that have symptoms of COVID for up to 3 weeks, up to 3 months after getting diagnosed. So, basically, parts of the virus stick around their body and continue to aggravate their system. And it's honestly something that we see a lot in other chronic conditions. Like we talk about like inflammation in the body. There are conditions like fibromyalgia where you kind of like are chronically in pain. And that's kind of what it started to feel like for some of these people with like what's called long COVID or COVID long haulers. And through some of my work, I got to like interview some of the scientists that were like developing some of these therapies. And they basically use like machine learning, like big data, all these technologies to like run tests to figure out what specifically was happening with long haulers and then like create a therapy and then like within 6 to 8 months like find all of these Facebook groups of patients that were like no one's helping us and
wow,
like recruit them and you just like look at it and you're like humans are so interesting
hmm,
like we are able to do so much and the science that we have now and the technology we have now like it's what keeps me up at night like it's basically what I do 24/7 because of my work as well is a lot of media reporting on some of this but
right, right.
it blows my mind it
It's
totally does.
insane, like the trajectory of human evolution and the integration of science with technology, and the development of our intellect as well. It's just crazy. It's crazy because like even in our lifetime, Gina, like think of how much technology and science has evolved from when we were kids to where we are today. I'll
Remember
give you a
BBM
classic.
in undergrad like BBM was a shit.
Do you remember Tamagotchis? Literally a
Yes,
small
let's go there.
that was the only digital piece of
That
like
was the shit.
a bit. That was a shit back then. And
Oh
it just
man.
took a little bit to engage us. And that little shit, or even an MP3 or a Sony Walkman, has now
Oh, my
become
Sony
spot on.
Walkman was like, oh, I had the Sony MP3 player.
And you probably
Whoa.
could only have 30 songs or
Yeah, it
20
was like a
songs.
hundred songs, and I had to like convince my dad to not get like the smallest one, but the medium one, because I had a lot
Hmm.
of song interests. Like I needed the Punjabi songs and the English songs, Dad. I needed both
Yeah.
of them. He was like, "That's a very good point."
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy then. And now it gets you thinking like, well, if this much has happened within the first half or the first third of our lives,
Yeah.
what's gonna happen in the next 10 years, next 5 years, 20 years? Um, you know, so you mentioned Gina, your work. Maybe for the listeners that are tuning in, if you could summarize this is a short introduction, what do you do?
Sure. I often struggle to answer this question because I've really created like a freelance career for myself over the last 2 years. But I would say like the nuts and bolts of what I do is I really like I love like we've been saying the intersection of technology and science and like humanity. Like how can technology actually be a force for good and help us? Because since the freaking dawn of technology, the whole thing was it's going to make our lives easier. It's going to be amazing, you know? But like, has that really happened? Are we really better off? Like, I think different, different documentaries that have come out in the last year alone shed light on like, are we really happier? Like, is this really utopia? Is it a dystopia? You know, so I think I don't need to go there, but I'm very curious at like what are the ethical questions we should be asking about these technologies? You know, how should we be preparing people and building their tech literacy? Just like we
Hmm.
build, you know, regular literacy to read a book, like I think we need to help equip people with the tools to understand things like privacy, understand their data,
Hmm.
and understand, you know, how both of those things can be leveraged for them and their own good, you know, because it's already being leveraged by like private companies, you know. And I think those conversations are basically the frame of all the projects I take on. So I'm doing that work with Western University in what's called their lab for knowledge translation in health. So basically helping research projects actually like connect to people that are working at the front lines. Yeah, so basically helping all this research get to like entrepreneurs and get to frontline nonprofits, you know, whether it's
Hmm.
about COVID communications, which is one of the projects, or it's about, you know, data surveillance and the
Hmm.
ethics of data surveillance is a project. So we have like tech people involved there.
Right.
And then to kind of balance some of that research stuff, because I like feel like I was born an entrepreneur, mostly because my parents are like hustlers by virtue of being immigrants.
Yeah.
So I
Shout out to
also
Quiznos. Shout out to Quiznos.
shout out to Quiznos. Yes. Oh my God, so funny. Um, but also my mom was like an entrepreneur growing up. She was like a seamstress, right? And her and my uncle worked at like a fashion house, you know, shout out to Scarborough fashion houses, Fashion Valley
East side.
represent.
Middle field.
Middlefield,
Was it on
Fashion Valley
was
represent. So I've just grown up around like how do you just not just have one job, but like, you know, keep
Hmm.
build a life for yourself. Always have your hand in different things. Like my mom also runs a nonprofit in Markham. Like she's a very busy woman, you know.
That's amazing. Shout out to your mom.
Shout out to my mom. There we go.
I
Sophie
mean, the
Uppal.
apple doesn't really fall far from the tree, right? You'll be surprised how much, the things we do day to day, how much we're influenced by the environment that we're in and the upbringing that
Mm-hmm.
we're through, right?
Completely.
Um, you brought up, you brought up a really interesting point when you were describing what you're doing is, technology is supposed to make life easier. And, as I'm sitting at my desk and I'm off of Teams right now, like I'm supposed to be working, but I took a little bit of a break.
Mm-hmm.
I can't help but notice the amount of emails that I have, right? 100 years ago, the only form of communication was by mail. You would write a letter and it would get from point A to point B. It might take days, 12 days, 30 days. A goddamn pigeon or a bird probably flew that letter to wherever it needed to go. And then, the advent of, then, Canada Post or the mailing system happened. And then email came. And email, it was like, okay, you can get a message instantly anywhere around the world right away. And it was supposed to make life easier. I don't know about you, Gina, and I don't know if my listeners agree, but email stressed me out because I have over 150, actually way more than that. I don't want to disclose because it looks bad, but
Wow.
I have hundreds of emails, and
Yeah.
it's like the simplicity and the ease of communication, which was supposed to make it the job easier, actually makes it even more complex now because now we have to weave through the hundreds and hundreds of emails that we get. So that's an interesting point. Like I think that sometimes evolution can make things difficult, more difficult than they need to be. But trying to find that balance and striking or dissecting and figuring out, well, how can we leverage it to its fullest potential? It takes creating an ecosystem between academic institutions, work, private capital, and governments, right? And I think
Mhm.
once you create that ecosystem, which I feel like that's what you're in, connecting researchers to, let's say, entrepreneurs that have the money and the ideas of creating that future state of whatever that state is in this post-COVID world. So,
Totally, totally. And there's so much humility in that work too, right?
hmm.
Because like I've been doing this sort of partnerships work for my whole career pretty much. I started at Mars. And there is a lot of humility involved with like not knowing the future. And, you know, like these people that invented these technologies didn't want them to be this way, you know?
Hmm.
Like I'm sure there are a lot of people that have like trauma around inventing like the like button, you know, and like what's that caused for people, what that's caused for people. But I do think that people have good intentions. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that when we build these technologies, like this is why the research world is great, because it allows for us to slow down and like not go so fast. Like I also work for a tech company. I love going fast. I love having an idea and then in like within the month being able to execute it because you
Mm-hmm.
just do it, and you learn a ton through that process. So I love that. But I also think there's something to be said about creating space to just like slow the fuck down and, think through like who is really benefiting from these technologies, who is being left out, like can we, as we get really excited and build all these tools, can we also build like little stepping stones for the people that are being left out, whether that's
Right.
training programs, whether you go the extra mile and really help onboard people onto your tools,
Mm-hmm.
like really think through, like there's a really neat little niche of people now that work in something called humane tech development. So it's
Okay.
basically like, how do you, the same science behind making like scrolling addictive, how do you turn that on its head and make these technologies that actually like heal you and make you feel better? And I blog about a lot of that, so we can like hit people up if people want to like read about that. I think that world is fascinating
Yeah.
because
What's your
then you're
blog?
like,
This is shameless plug right now.
shameless plug for my blog. It's not my blog, it's a company
What
blog.
what's the blog? Like what's the link?
So it's
Yeah.
bowheadhealth.com/blogs or bowheadhealth.com/futures. But it's basically like trying to understand the future of healthcare and all of these technologies and like, can they actually help us? Um, so I'm fascinated by that space, but I think it's like we don't talk about that enough. Like we
We
just are
don't.
like fascinated by like a cool shiny wearable, amazing, but like how is it actually helping you? And you're creating all of this data now. Like we all have Apple Watches and Fitbits. There's all this data being created. Does it really help you? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about so first of all, Apple Watch. Like that's a technology that I can get behind because when I first got the watch, um, I I knew I was going to use it quite a bit. I didn't realize that I would be using it as much as I'm using it today because it like the move rings on the Apple Watch really get you pushing and motivated to kind of get active. It's like shit, I haven't hit,
Yeah.
that ring. I might as well do a lap around the house or fuck go to like I
There
cannot
you
go
go.
anywhere. Like if I work out without my watch, I'll feel like it's a wasted effort. That's crazy though psychologically because it's like it's not a wasted effort. The most important thing is you're working out for your body. But the fact that I need to have that recorded and have that data to remind me, because now with the Apple Watch, I can go on the calendar view and see the days I worked out and the days I didn't work out. I think that it can definitely benefit you a lot, right? And it comes down to the reception of people and the need for technology. A classic example would be Google when they tried to develop the smart city by waterfront. Fuck, I can't remember the name. Oh, it
It
was
was
Sidewalk
Sidewalk Labs.
Labs.
Yeah.
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 Um, I remember when I was living in the city, the amount of town halls that they had at St. Lawrence Market. And because the public there was this fear, oh, our data is going to get collected by Google. Reality check, people. Your data's already getting collected by Google. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Anytime, like on your phone, on the internet, your data's already out there, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, that project was shut down now and they decided to go elsewhere. But, that was a really interesting project. Like the ability to integrate technology into a community where, the cool things were like the lights, for example, solar powered panels, signage could be like changed digitally instead of having actual printed signage everywhere. It is what it is. I mean, it didn't come into fruition, but that's an example where public sometimes gets a little too paranoid of technology and not realizing that they're kind of already living in a smart city. It's just not physical. It's virtual. It's on the internet.
Totally. And I think it's like, how do we again like have these conversations not at a point like you should be helping people understand the future of cities and smart cities, before Sidewalk Labs even buys the space, right? Because as soon as you have that player already there, it sets up incentives such that people think that they're on one end of an exchange and they're not really sure the value they're getting. And of course, you're going to start to feel apprehensive. So I think, like with the Apple Watch and like all of these things, I always come back to, how are these companies educating us and how are we, not being so easy and really thinking twice before we, hand over our data. Because I think there is some due process to be done here. I'm all for innovation. I think the future of like digital me is going to be so cool. Like I've used the Loop and I think I'm going to get on the Apple Watch train. I feel like the whole human as robot thing still scares me. But I agree. Like, I love the feedback loops. I think they make complete sense for the behavior change process. Like,
That's so
getting
true. Yeah.
feedback loops, gamifying your experience and wanting to like have a streak. And like, I'm a total sucker for those.
Yeah. Think about the times like I'll be lying around in bed and I'd be like, fuck, I'm gonna sleep another 30 minutes. And then somehow I end up getting a notification from Strava that, so and so Mark Anthony just ran 18 kilometers, 7 a.m. And I can't help but be like, okay, I need to get my ass up and do something. And so there's like, things like that. Like it's not just, the feedback loop within your own progress, but also seeing the progress around you.
Mhm.
And, Strava is a classic example of a social media platform that motivates people to not only work out, but share their workouts with the people around them and motivate everybody. Right. So, a question for you, Gina, is with technology, there's all this great stuff with technology, right? As we've discussed, and the opportunities. But, you know, in your opinion, what are some things to kind of like the trends that you feel like we need to be a little bit more like the negative trends of social media, or not social media, of technology?
Mhm.
And it could be in the form of through your work. Like, what are some things that you feel like technology, we kind of have to, if we don't take these things into consideration, it could lead to the opposite of what we discussed, a de-evolution, if you know what I
Yeah,
mean.
totally, totally.
Hmm.
One of the projects that I'm really fascinated about right now is we're looking at the ethics of surveillance in public health. So, over the last year, countries all over the world have adapted these like contact tracing apps. Some have adapted, using CCTV cameras. Different parts of the world are like the most surveilled places now, and it was under the guise of public health. Like, we need to do this to protect everyone. But now we're seeing, like, did those technologies really help us? Like, first of all, people didn't really download the apps in the first place because there wasn't enough trust to begin with. But I think
That's huge.
it makes us ask some of the questions around, like, what are the conversations we're having about where all this data is being stored, who owns it, who's responsible for it. Like, I was reading that ransomware is now one of the most profitable businesses to be in. To give you an idea of how valuable our data is, there's huge ransomware attacks happening all the time and we don't hear about them. I mean, the most recent one with the oil pipeline in the US like really got people's attention. But these are criminal organizations
S-
that are quite
Sorry, can
sophisticated.
you can you shed some light on that? I may be out of the
Yeah.
loop with that.
So
What
there,
happened?
so ransomware basically is bad actors getting into your computer systems and preventing you access from them, and or getting access to them and then threatening you, that they're going to share that information if you don't pay a ransom.
Okay.
So, a huge one in healthcare was in Finland just a few months ago at the end of 2020, where ransomware actors got into private mental health clinics. And in Finland, they were like these clinics, they called them the McDonald's of therapy. So a lot of people went to them, and they were very well used. And they got hacked. So these people that were suffering from mental health and anxiety were now getting emails saying that we have your data, we're going to release it. And these are very sensitive people talking about, past trauma, drug use, like, like huge sensitive files.
Mm-hmm.
And if they didn't pay the ransom, they were going to release the information. And these are the things that like we think are just a movie, but it actually happens.
Mm-hmm.
And in the
Mm-hmm.
States last week, a huge oil pipeline got attacked and it threatened oil supply in the States, like affected markets. There was huge inquiries into it. And that whole thing got out of hand because the criminals didn't vet the criminals that they were getting money from. So they basically, like, two criminals got into a fight over this oil pipeline ransomware attack. So, I mean, these are some of the dark side things, but also I think we just need to ask more questions. And a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
work that we're doing in the world of like public health surveillance is, how do we just have conversations with patients about, like nurses and doctors should be having these conversations, like this is your health data. It's really valuable. Be careful what you do with it, and that primes people to then even start to think about, digital health wallets and all of these things that I think are going to be the future. It's, the tech company I work with is creating an encrypted digital health wallet that we think helps you store all of that data, but it's not, we're not there yet as a market.
Right.
But to get people more cautious, I think isn't a bad thing. I think we should know
Mm.
these things. Our parents, when they came here, like they didn't have to deal with data systems in the same way,
I'm
you
I'm
know?
pretty sure our parents, like even our grandparents, they didn't have a like not okay, my parents had a birth certificate, I think, but my parents, grandparents had no birth certificate. Like
No.
their birthdays were celebrated based on what they just I'm pretty sure they just made up a date,
Yeah, my dad's birthday
right?
is completely made up. My grandma is like, oh, it was after Laurier. It was like it was getting warm again.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they would be like. Yeah, it was after it was after Vasaki or sometime, and they just pick an arbitrary date.
Totally.
But
Yeah.
you brought up health passports, right? Digital health
Or
passports
digital
or
health
wallets.
wallets.
Sorry,
Yeah.
wallets. I think that's key because, like, like for parents or people that have health related issues, whether it's, certain medications, whether it's certain illnesses, or certain allergies, having that handy versus like traditionally when I go to the doctor's office, I get a clipboard and like half the shit I don't even remember. And so it's always, innately I just go, no, 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 right? Versus having to scan something.
Yeah.
That's cool. I know you can't talk much about it, but that's kind of cool. Like I
Yeah.
definitely see the benefits of that. But um, you were talking about surveillance, and I remember reading an article on Medium a couple of months ago. China is, you know, they're out there, Big Brother and all that. Uh, I forgot the number, but they have cameras literally at every intersection,
Mm-hmm.
and their cameras, the CCTV, is actually accessible by the public. So if I'm in my living room in China, I can actually turn on a TV station and I can see a camera around the block. The reason they do that is because China believes that by providing public CCTV access to surveillance, the public then can enforce law. So if there's
Wow.
any criminal
Yeah.
activity happening, the public will call the police versus having to hire, so now they have one police officer for every 1,000 versus having, 15 for every 1,000.
Wow.
But at the same time, guess where all that data is going? The government is having full control and they can see everything that's happening within their country. So, there was a huge article about that and the ethics behind that, because on one hand, they're saying it's to prevent, lawlessness, but on the other hand, it's a total breach of privacy because they can see everything, and I think they were saying that they encourage citizens to put up cameras to connect to CCTV so that they get some sort of tax credit.
I mean, I'm sure
And
in China they just mandate it. Like this is also like how the asymmetry of this experience around the world, because certain regimes, like dictatorships, can just say, this is what's going to happen. This is what's happening to your data. You have no choice, So I think that's a really interesting point. Also, China is like blows my mind the things that they're like doing with data. There's this really cool website. It's called socialcooling.com. And the tagline is, like oil leads to global warming, data leads to social cooling. And it's the idea that as all of these apps start to have your data and like start to influence our behavior, our society as a whole is going to become increasingly censored. And like, what is that going to do to life?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a really cool website. I love the story that they tell. But yeah, it's like that idea of people watching you, it changes your behavior and it could limit your desire to take risks or exercise free speech. Like we're already seeing that in China. Like people are scared to do things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's turned into like scores, and that then stratifies you in society as being good or bad. Like, is that the kind of world we want to live in? Like,
Yeah,
like, is
yeah.
that what we thought, microchips were going to lead to when someone invented them?
Yeah, yeah. It's
So,
crazy.
yeah.
It's like we talk about cancel culture and a hypersensitive culture that we're living in today where people have to all, check themselves and think twice or think three times before they post anything because they don't know how it's going to be received, and they also don't want to be the unpopular opinion. I had a guest on my podcast a couple episodes ago, Ricky, and they created an app called Cast. And what Cast is a unanimous based voting tool. So you can put up it's unanimous. So I can put up a statement like, um, you know, do you think Doug Ford did a good job? Right. And you won't see who voted, like you'll see yes or no, but they'll give you a breakdown of the demographics. So you get to see the age, and eventually there's going to be an update where you get to see the geography. But you'll notice when you're on the app on Cast that there's certain demographics that get fed into the data that we receive on the news. So like CP24, they might say 15,000 people got polled, and they think that travel should not be allowed. But then they need to kind of dig through the data and also let us know, well, out of the 15,000, what were the age demographics? How many of them were young? Where were they located? And because we just get a single number, we kind of tend to generalize, and it's not fair, I think, from a data point of view. So they did that, and shout out to the boys. Like it's something definitely that's cool, and I think it
Mhm.
goes back to what you're saying is we need to be able to leverage and understand data, not necessarily just assertively, but properly as well. Of how can we have all this data? How can we leverage and use it so that we can create a better tomorrow, right?
Totally. No, those are really great points, Sunny. I think that's amazing work. And I think that that's the kind of stuff that, people want. Like, and a lot of people or a lot of companies may think it's too much for people. I think you paternalize a little too much. But if we see anything from like, if we look, to Gen Z, who
Mm-hmm.
are so activated and so committed to figuring out, how to get the kinds of information they need and, find their own information sources. And I think what you're saying is like being very critical about what you're hearing and seeing and like siphoning through fake news and misinformation. Like this is a generation now that is going to have to figure that out, like we
Mm-hmm.
basically
Mm-hmm.
got our information from like textbooks or like maybe Google in like undergrad, but like in high school and stuff, it was like,
Going to the library. Like, you remember I
yeah,
had a library card. I would go to the weekend, like, mom, drop me off. Encyclopedias. I
I'm
would
about to
literally
go
have to
ham at this library, mom. Like,
yeah.
leave me here. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
Whereas now, like, and education is going to be interesting too, because like I feel like the schooling system, we've advanced way more than the schooling system has, because I can sit at home and Google any information that I want, but it's like, and versus in school, it's still coming out of a textbook. So that I think there needs to be, that's a completely different podcast or a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
because like I don't know what the future of education is going to look like, right? And how our generation parents are going to feel of like, I have an opinion on school now where it's like you don't necessarily need to go to school to be successful in today's day and age, Whereas my parents' generation, it's like you have to go to university, and I don't blame them. I think that's the times that we lived in. It was needed, like it was needed to go to school to get a good job and whatnot. But today, it's not really the case, right?
No, we have to adapt for sure. And I think it's like really the future is like learning how to learn, like
Yeah,
learning how
yeah.
to parse through all this information. Because I also know like I work on a project called On Canada, and we have a lot of Gen Z young people on our team that create Instagram content around COVID. And they are so great at getting information, but it is really that intergenerational exchange that happens between some of the older team members and the younger ones, where you're contextualizing, like, what does this information actually mean? And like really good programs in schools that do that, I'm all for. Like, and I
Right.
noticed that at the different places I've, been in school, that it's not always the same, like quality of education you get. So I think we really need to pay attention to like what kinds of educators do we need? Do we need just like the old man that's going to lecture? Or do we need like facilitators,
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
how do you create classrooms where people are like talking and, debating? And like that's what builds critical analysis versus just sitting there, absorbing information. Like that can happen through like an informational video that is going to be way better than any prof,
Yeah,
No
yeah,
offense to
absolutely.
profs. I love the lecture and seminar when it's needed, but it can't be our gold standard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There was a course I took, or a class. I don't know if it was high school or middle school. It was called current events, and it
Yeah.
was just talking about like, things happening in the world. I can only imagine if that class was taught today, like, the debates that would be happening in that classroom, right? You know, and just kind of want to shift gears because, we all live our own complicated lives. Like I'm the main character of my life. I'm the main character of my life, which is a movie. I have my, from relationships to careers to ambitions to, the mental, emotional health pillars. Everything that's happening in the world is revolving around me, but everything that and in your life you're your main character, right? Where every like we live in such a complicated fabrication of a world where every single person is thinking that they're the main character of this reality that we live in, right? The person next to you, like their life is just as complicated as yours, right? And it just boggles my mind because I might sit here and I might be a little, maybe down because I'm like, oh, like work's not going too well, or I'm annoyed at my brother or something. But like, halfway across the world there's, like for example Palestine and Israel, right? Like that, what's happening, it's unfortunate. Whether you're It doesn't matter what side you're on, at the end of the day, like no one deserves, like the loss of human life should not be acceptable, right? And it's just unfair that there's such violence happening in today's day and age. On one hand you have this pandemic that's happening, but to see that, and now to see that, going back to our topic on technology, be able to see that, like on Instagram, on TikTok or whatever, and not do anything about it, it just gives you a little bit of perspective because you might have a guy that's my age, right? That's now literally like literally all he can think of is the fact that he just lost his entire family. And then you have the same guy on, across the sea that's worried about sending out an email for work, and it's just crazy to think that. This kind of gave me a little bit of perspective change that, that's the reality we live in. You know what I mean? And, going back to sifting through news and what the right news is, I think it makes us, critical thinking is important, but it also is imperative that we become global citizens, right? It's not enough that we just stand on the sidelines and not say anything or do anything. The West tends to stay silent in these kind of issues. And when, for example, when terrorism happens, right? Or like when those kind of issues happen and they affect the West, all of a sudden then it becomes something that we have to, you know, act on. But people don't realize that there's a lot of trauma that's happening to a lot of these kids right now, right? Like imagine being 5 years old and now you have no parents because they got blown up in a building. Like that's just fucked up, right?
Mhm.
And it's it's one thing. It's fucked up that it happened 20 years ago or 10 years ago, but it's happening today.
I think it's important to connect to the collective more than we do, like as
Hmm,
you
hmm.
said, we are the main characters in our lives, but I've in the last 2 years like really grown like a spiritual practice around like really connecting to some of the pain and suffering that is all over
Hmm.
the world, because we also can't, you know, hold it back, because that's not going to help anyone. Like, we can't let all of the suffering overtake you, because then you can't help yourself. You have to help yourself first. But I do think there's something to be said around really reflecting on what's happening all over the world, and finding community to process what's happening together. Whether that's something that's affecting your communities where you live, or if you're diaspora and you're looking at, things happening back home. Um, or you're, a global citizen, as you said, and looking at what's happening to our brothers and sisters in Palestine and
Mm-hmm.
Israel. And I think, at least how I'm kind of making sense of it for myself, is like trying to commit to reading what's happening, and
Mm-hmm.
like really understanding, like, this is not happening in my backyard, but like I should know what's going on. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, as well, where you can, giving to amazing organizations that are on the ground helping and supporting when our governments are falling short.
Mm-hmm.
um but yeah, it's some really good points you're bringing up about everything that's happening in the world, and like, how do you not let it overwhelm you,
Mm-hmm.
and find like meaningful ways to engage in it with intention, in community, and give back, but like not just say, oh my goodness, it's too much, I can't engage, which I think, it's tough. I get it.
That's
It's
yeah.
tough.
Yeah. You traveling, I know when we first met, or when we caught up actually, Brazil. So talk to me a little bit about, like, so how was that experience?
Yeah, it was a like one of the best experiences, I would say. It was not my first time leaving Toronto. So I had lived in Washington, D.C. for a year for school, and also had done some traveling and got a little bit of the travel bug. I had already been to Brazil, and one of my best friends um, is Brazilian. So that's who I was starting work with. And that kind of made the connection there. And it's always nice to move somewhere and kind of know the place a little bit and know like good people. So that definitely helped that transition. And it was also one of those things where the company was based in Brazil, but a lot of our work was also, traveling to and from Europe, and spending a good amount of time there as well. So it was a very interesting year. And the pandemic did cut it short, but I'm really glad I did it.
So wait, you were there when the pandemic started, or?
I was back home for the holidays and was taking a break, kind of being home. And then that was like February. And I still remember um, we were actually in Toronto having a meeting, planning for a project that was going to be in Dubai. And I was hearing that like all of these things were going off in Iran, and like Dubai is very close to Iran. And I was like, guys, I don't know if this is going to happen. And it was like, oh, you're just being negative, Gina. But I was like, oh, it's a pandemic. But lo and behold, like 3 weeks later, the world was shut down. So it feels crazy to even say that. And I mean, I think all of the, cards fell where they should, at the end of the day, because it gave me an opportunity to, reroute in Toronto. I think the company is thriving as a like digital remote marketing agency, which is really cool to be able to, have that opportunity to work in person for a while, get to know each other, and then sort of figure out how to do the remote work thing, which for a startup, like, let me tell you, that's a lot of work to figure that out. So kudos to them. And then, yeah, and then it got, COVID took off, and all of these projects started coming in around data surveillance and communication. So it's funny how the world works when you just like have a lot of trust and follow like your curiosity. And I also like just love to take risks. I think that's like, I love the adrenaline rush of like starting over and figuring out how to do it. I think the beginning of any project is my favorite part of it, like that energy. um but yeah, so it was really fun.
Yeah, the beginning of any project, or like, it's like it's got blank canvas, and it's like, okay, what am I gonna do, right? And there's like so much you can do, and there's so much that gets done. If you were premier of the province, what would you have done differently?
Oh my God, I don't want to answer this question.
You don't have to
Everything.
ask.
Everything. I would have not cut essential services years
Mhm.
ago. I think what we're seeing right now with the like how things have shaken out, it's not like just this issue. It's like years of disinvestment in social services, not having a public health ecosystem that was well connected, not having strong networks into grassroots organizations, all of these like missing links that we've been saying in public health for years was an issue, are just to build on each other. And it's not usually a problem when your public health system is just starting to like keep things afloat. But we've seen with pandemics, like they kind of, no rules barred, you have to apply very clear policies effectively. You have to be in agreement across the board. Viruses don't care what province they're in or what country
Mhm.
they're in, So it's like, what have
Or
we
what
learned?
time of the day it is, right? Like they don't
Totally.
care. Like especially when they talk about curfews and stuff, it's like, I get it. It's to reduce the number of people that come out. But what about all the people that then, if you have a curfew at 9 p.m., everyone's gonna be like, okay, we have a curfew at 9. We have to be outside during the daytime. You know what I mean? So I don't really think curfews are effective at all. But yeah, you're right. Vaccines don't, sorry, not vaccines, but viruses don't know. They don't discriminate between those factors, right?
No, no. And I think just better
Mm.
experts at the top of our government. I think we've learned like we have to elect people that know what they're doing. And we as, citizens have a responsibility to understand what's going on in our government, to elect people that we believe have our best interests at heart, and really make some noise. And I think I'm very excited for how many young people hopefully show up to the polls, come the next election cycles, because we've seen very clearly what happens when we don't invest in public services and just do some of these basic things that protect all of us. And yes, they flow resources to our most vulnerable, but we know in a pandemic, if they're not safe, no one's safe.
Right, right. I can't help but think, and I'm just having this thought as you were talking, that, we talk about voting and having a democratic system in place. We vote for a premier, we vote for MP, MPP, and, they're in government for the next, 4 years for the most part. I think when it comes to policies, imagine a system where the public input is provided when they make certain policy decisions or big decisions like, what, we're going to be shutting down businesses or we're going to be having a lockdown. When they first announced a 14-day lockdown last year, this is probably like the 30th or 40th anniversary of this 14-day extension, which is crazy because we're really doing is the entire economy is now relying on information that's being expressed to us through CP24, through Doug Ford, who has no idea what he's talking about because he's just regurgitating information from medical officers that are to his right and to his left, but those people weren't voted in; they were appointed, right? And so we don't really know essentially like what's your resume, do they have the credibility and understanding of what's really happening. And so then like for example the on project that you're involved in, you know and there's other projects that I've seen online of healthcare professionals that are coming out more and more and saying that this is like, how is it that I can go to a nursery and pick up a bunch of plants to fucking plant in my garden, but I can't go to the gym to work out, or I can't go outside and go camping. I had a camping trip scheduled for this weekend and it got canceled because the May 20th extension got extended to June 2nd.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would choose voting, but I think that there does need to be more like transparency in the decision making process. I love that people have become like overnight epidemiologists, reading all these graphs and understanding all this data. But I do think that it's like how decisions are communicated with transparency and the data. Like, walk us through your decision making, bro. Like, how'd you come up with this? And that wasn't done since day one. So the trust was already eroding. And like the reason it's come to, you now wanting a vote is like that's how little there's trust there is, And I think if you ask me, like the biggest policy challenge for leaders right now is thinking about how to rebuild trust. And how do you get citizens to re-engage with what you're saying when they've been, feel like they've been given the runaround over the last couple months? So I think that trust building is really important. And I think like transparency and compassion in communication. So like give me the information and then like let me know how frustrating it is to hear this information and that it's really hard. And this is what we need to do and this is why. And you know, I think that that happens, but it happens when it's convenient right now. And decisions have not been made based on science and policies have not been made based on evidence. So I think there's, yeah, like you're right. There's lots of systemic things that need to happen, but I think this has taught us a lot about like what we need from our systems.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what kind of change, erupts or happens or emerges once things open up again and, election season is here. Um, you know, Now that I think about it, like even like the voting per policy might not be the most effective and efficient way of doing things. But I think the idea, what I was alluding to is just that, so many important decisions are made sometimes when you initially voted for someone to do one job. Like had you known that we're going to be in this pandemic, I wonder if our voting would have for the person that's going to be at that position been different, would have changed, would have been like, okay, what's your experience with, having some sort of medical understanding maybe might be a thing as well, right? Like maybe we might be more prone to be like, okay, we should now elect the medical officer of Canada or Ontario. That should be an elected person. And so anyways, it'd be interesting to see that. Um, I can't help but think about you talked about these vulnerable communities and how they were hit the hardest. Doug Ford, for example, like healthcare was a big one when right before COVID, I think was when he cut spending. And I remember there was huge protests happening, but amongst doctors and nurses, even with teachers, I think. But like, look at like now, like healthcare in general, I think that there's this need for, um, in my personal opinion, privatization. We think about free healthcare and we think it's a good thing, but sometimes it's not. It's not all. It's clear right now that free healthcare doesn't necessarily mean best healthcare, right? And if you're someone that's has to choose between life and death, then no amount of money you're willing to put everything on the table, to choose life, then private healthcare might be the way to go. And I think that needs to be, it's going to become more and more of a topic, I think, um, in
Yeah, I
Canada. But mhm.
yeah, I think the navigating what the future model of healthcare needs to look like, it definitely can't look like what we have right now. I think people are realizing how inefficient it is. I think that, in the States, we see that, private model, and we also see like the impacts that model has on equity and access, and like, when you create a two-tier system, what kind of impact does that have on outcomes for patients? But I hear what you're saying, and I think that there is, we need to talk about the business model of healthcare, and how people make money because there's a lot of money to be made in that system. But right now, very much the business model is that you see X patient for X number of time, and then a payment happens. But if we like rethink about how we take care of people and how a hospital functions to take care of its community versus somewhere you go when you're sick and you need help, or just basically an open door, anyone come in whenever you have any problem. Like I think that there's a lot there, which is I feel like its own podcast. But I think you're right. I think there are a lot of really smart people that are now starting to work on some of these issues much more publicly because, healthcare was broken before. In Canada, we like to think we have this amazing healthcare system and like it's better than the US. Like it's not a great comparison, first of all. I think we should aim a little higher than our neighbor to the
Yeah.
south. Um, but it doesn't work for everyone. It definitely doesn't work for people in rural, remote areas. It doesn't work for people that are immigrants or marginalized or newcomers. Like we've seen, these are the people that our system doesn't work for. So, and these are the people that are, being hit the hardest by this pandemic. And that's not fair and that's not right. And I think a lot of people are starting to look at that and say, like, what kind of country do we want to live in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see that. Like, it's very complicated because then you also have to consider marginalized communities, and so that don't have money, they shouldn't be neglected as well, right? So there's different caveats to
Totally.
consider. You know, kind of shifting gears a little bit, you're in Toronto now. You're right by High Park. What's your routine like? Like, like what do now that we're in COVID, like what's my routine's been gone through radical changes throughout the duration of this pandemic, even more now that I'm back in the suburbs. But like, what's your routine? And I only ask that because there might be certain people kind of like, might be lacking motivation and be like, okay, how can I better spend my time now that the sun's out too? I'm sure outdoors is a big component of that. But what's a typical day of like, in the day of life of Gina Uppal look like?
Um, that's a great question. I live, yeah, like you said, I live by Sunnyside Beach in High Park. So I love being outdoors. So between meetings or between work sprints, I usually try to go for a walk or, like have an excuse to go down to the street and grab something, grab a coffee. I think it's like really important to keep moving. I'm also a freelancer. So the way I structure my week is I usually do like pretty intense work sprints Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So I do the whole like 20 minutes of work, 10-minute break, like Pomodoro, I think it's called. And I do work sprints and break sprints for 3 days. And then I usually try to have all of my like calls on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And then I try to mostly take Friday off when I can to just like think and like work on the business and like figure out how I want to grow and do some of that work and obviously all of the loose ends. Um, but I also will say that I did work much harder during the winter because there was nothing else to do. And I'm really looking forward to taking a lighter summer.
Yeah, that sounds dope. The concept of work sprints, I think that can be very effective.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It keeps it
Yeah.
fresh. It makes me like excited. I also think that when you're working like really intensely on writing, I can't do that for 5 days a week, like I would just be I used to do it and I would just be burnt out, and I now realize like life is too short to be so tired by the weekend you can't even have fun. Like I prepare for my weekend, Friday is full
Yeah.
preparation. um
What do you normally do on the weekends? Are you
but I'm just mostly excited to like get to know my area in the summertime, and like
yeah,
there's
yeah.
really great farmers markets. Like Roncy is a little village, and it's really cute. So I'm excited to just get to know the neighborhood and
Check out all the restaurants.
yeah, check out
Yeah.
all the restaurants. I'm not far from Ossington, and I'm really excited for all of those yummy restaurants to reopen. um and yeah, and then start planning for post COVID world and travel and like what I want my 30s to look like because I'll be 30 next year. So yeah, it's fun. I'm
Oh
really
wow.
looking
So,
forward to
so
it.
last year 20s. So enjoy it while enjoy it to your fullest. But 30s aren't that bad either.
Oh, I am very excited for my 30s. I feel like it'll be the best. I like have all the things that I want in my life, and I'm very grateful for all the people I have. And you just like have fun and you like, have self-worth and you know what you want. It's great.
Yeah. The great thing about your 30s is like, your 20s, you kind of, I feel like for the most part, for most people actually, you kind of lack the resources to do some of the things that you want to do. Whereas in your 30s, you have all the resources, aka money, right? Where you can literally now travel and do the things that you want to do and kind of relive your 20s if you really want to, but in a more sophisticated or, you know, how do I put this? Yeah, in a sophisticated, mature way. I'm hoping to travel, dude. I'm heading over to Banff in July
Nice.
and possibly Portugal in September, but we'll see.
Those sound like
We'll
great
see.
destinations.
Yeah, I haven't really been anywhere. I mean, no one has, but so I'm just looking forward to getting the fuck out of here.
I
But
think
Gina, this podcast has been it's been dope as expected. I'm happy we got to do this because we were supposed to do this so long ago, and there's always been something like creeping up to come in between us and recording. But today the internet's been fantastic. You know, the quality's been great. Conversation's been dope. Any last parting words for for our listeners, for future you, if you were to go back and listen to this maybe 5 years from now? Any parting words?
I mean, I think we deserve to get back to our normal lives after this pandemic. And I think we're all really excited for that. Thank you, Sunny. I think this was a really fun conversation too. And I really appreciated all the ways we also like held space for the people and the perspectives that are still having a hard time, and like it is going to be a hard recovery, and there is a lot of like good as well as a lot of hardship that we've all seen. I think I appreciated how this conversation kind of touched on both. And I'm, yeah, very much so the optimist still, and think that we're gonna, the world we're gonna create after this pandemic is like gonna be a really beautiful one if we like hold both of those things. So I'm excited, and I'm excited to go to a concert together. Let's manifest that.
Yeah. If I'm in the city, definitely we should get together anyways, and we'll definitely connect again in person. Now that it's summer.
Yeah,
But
I'm
Gina,
always by Sunnyside. So whenever you want to come, also my house has sup boards. So if you want to go stand up paddleboarding.
oh, sick.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have the whole fucking setup. So whenever you want to come down, let me know.
Sick. Down 100%. My really good friend actually lives close by to you.
Nice.
Shout out to Dion and Melissa. But yeah, they're not that far from me either. So definitely maybe we can all get together. But again, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
You are so welcome. This was so fun.
Everybody else, hope you guys have an amazing weekend. Happy Friday, and peace.